Well, I thought it was getting ready to start.
I thought so too. Oh, guess it was. I kept the right video. How I lose our intro, Tom?
All right, well, let's get started, Jimmy.
Hello, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday night, October the 26th, 2022, Jimmy. If it's Wednesday night,
It's Black Men Speak. So let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. And if you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe. Not necessarily in that order, but make sure you get all three done. Spread the word, more importantly, because we want to grow our channel this year. So invite as many people out as you can. The information, the guests that we have on this show have very valuable information to share. And if you had to go out into the marketplace, Tom, and try to buy this information through consulting, you end up spending a small fortune, if not a major fortune. And so the information we provide here is a great asset to those who watch.
I would agree, Jimmy.
So, Tom, introduce our guests and let's get into the topic.
All right, Jimmy. Well, welcome everyone out there. We thank you for joining us this evening. We, of course, have another thought-provoking topic and conversation for this evening. We're going to talk about Black America and the Black economy. But given what's been happening over the last couple of years, we're going to talk about the Black economy in the context of inflation, what's been happening with fiscal policy in our country. And now we are on the cusp of midterm elections. We're going to talk a little bit about politics. We have an economist with us here today that we are very, very proud to have to kind of share some insights and thoughts on what's going on in our community. We're going to talk a little bit about the Black economy, our agenda, and what's at stake in the midterm elections coming up on top of all of that. I would like to introduce to everyone Mr. Bill Cunningham. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for having me on. Delighted to be here.
And so what we're going to do as we get into our topic for today is we're going to ask Mr. Cunningham to tell us a little bit about his background, what he does, a little bit about his organization and the company that he runs right now, and then we will move swiftly into our topic for the evening.
So I'm an economist. Thank you again, Tommy. I'm an economist and operating out of Washington, D.C. I basically create impact investment, ESG investment initiatives and products. An example would be the Black Maternal Reduction investment vehicle that we've been working on, trying to get the Federal Reserve to finance efforts to reduce Black maternal mortality. And that's an example of the kinds of things that we're working on. We have a database, for those who are interested, of something called ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance Initiatives and Services and Ratings and that sort of thing. We put out a lot of research papers. Wealth in the Black community is one of them. Our most recent book is Thriving as a Minority-Owned Business in Corporate America, Building a Pathway to Success for Minority Entrepreneurs. But we'll talk also about some of the other research that we've done. We've done some analysis of the student loan forgiveness plan and its impact on the Black community. 60 billion, by the way, is what we estimate the Black community would see through that. We've also talked about or done research on the Inflation Reduction Act and its impact on the Black community. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope that was that helpful?
Yes, it was. And it was in a language that everybody can understand. We appeal to everyday working people who are trying to make a better lives for themselves and then hopefully have an impact by improving their lives, those of their families, and then ultimately our community and our great nation. And so I appreciate you sharing those thoughts with us. And we will make sure that before we get out of here this evening, we give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about and promote your book towards the end of the show. But as we get started, as a foundation conversation, Bill, tell us a little bit about what the Black economy looks like today in America. I mean, we think about it and we think about our very dubious existence in this country because of the experience of our ancestors, which is unlike any other immigrant group in the world. And we look at trying to build wealth on the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But we have some very unique nuances as to what's going on with Black America and our economy. And I want you to share a little bit about what your research has revealed and what the Black economy looks like today.
Well, right now, the Black economy is actually stronger than it's been over the past 5 or 6 years, in part because we actually did get a bump up due to COVID and due to the shutdown. So a lot of people saved money. They weren't spending money on dry cleaning or commuting or any of that sort of stuff. So that actually served to increase cash balances in the Black community. Now, that has since gone away, but it was pretty strong. I'd say 2020, 2021, still a struggle, but it was beneficial. What we've seen of late, and by the way, is employment is still strong in the Black community. Not equivalent. Black unemployment rates are still higher than white unemployment rates, but the strong employment picture bodes well for the Black economy overall. Again, we're not at parity yet, but relatively speaking, the employment picture is good. And let me say on that front, part of the policy questions concerning immigration, as you know, directly impact Black people and Black unemployment. Instead of, it's always been our position that a lot of the immigration that you saw had a negative impact on Black employment and Black wealth in general. And there's a lot of surplus labor in the Black community that can be put to task. So there's no real reason to go outside of the country to get labor. What you really need to do is to figure out a way to energize and to utilize the underutilized resources in the U.S. and specifically in the Black community. That's something that has not been done.
You bring up I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, since you talked about immigration, I want to add to this point and see if there's a distinction. Does that include the H-1B visa program also? So we're not just talking about illegal immigration, we're also talking about legal immigration and work permits to come in and work.
Very much so, very much so. If we could figure out a way to, there are immigration programs where immigrants can kind of buy their way into the country. If we could figure out a way to give that money to Black people, we could, kind of solve this differential between Black and white unemployment. But yes, very much so. That includes that. And again, it's always been our contention, the first thing that white economists say about immigration is that, well, immigrants come in, they do the jobs that nobody else wants to do.
That's what they say.
That is false. The issue is this. If you were paying people $100,000 a year to pick tomatoes, I guarantee you'd get a lot of people out there picking tomatoes. The issue is the wage rate, not the willingness of labor. Wage rate, wage conditions, that sort of thing, or working conditions, that sort of thing. Not willingness of labor. That's blaming the victim for an unfair distribution of economic resources. So, and again, this is what I mean when I say we have a lot of surplus labor in the Black community. If you look at the difference between Black and white unemployment, that could be brought on stream and help to lower immigration were we to develop and design the kind of policies that would do that.
So, I mean, I think that's a very interesting point that you bring up, because with the foundation of this country that was built on the backs of our ancestors were the first folks who were agriculturally and or constructioning wise building this country. And I find it quite interesting, and I can't speak to every state, but we look in the state of Texas because our grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, mothers and fathers did the agricultural work, they did the construction work, they did all the foundation work. Now, what you're saying, which makes sense economically, is that it's not a lack of labor, it's we bring in illegal immigrants who will work for significantly less under the if you don't do this, you're going back home conversation. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct. It's the wage rate and the all of these other factors that you correctly point to that influence the incentivation of this immigrant labor pool to work. That's right. If you don't pick those tomatoes for 70 cents an hour, then we're going to send you back to Mexico. A powerful incentive to get work out. Unfair to the victims of this type of labor incentivization, unfair to Black people because it results in a higher unemployment rate than we should have. And it also results in more concentrated wealth and income at the top. Because again, whenever you have a guy like an Elon Musk with 239 billion, that you can pay people more. Let's say his wealth goes down to 50 billion, but you take the difference between where he is now and 50 billion and you pay that out in wages. Well, that would make for a fairer distribution of income. It would actually make for more economic activity, because part of what happens is when you increase wages, the economy does better, relatively speaking, because people have more money. So they have more money and they're spending more money. And that has a multiplier effect throughout the entire system. So this idea that you have to concentrate wealth in the upper echelons and ignore everybody else as a way of incentivizing people to try to get rich is wrong. That's 1980s University of Chicago School economics that never worked. Trickle-down economics never worked. It wasn't going to work, can't work. So what we see is a need for kind of a rethinking about these systems and policies that are designed to implement these systems. Now, as long as I'm on the roll, let me keep going. What we've seen out of the Biden administration is great, is absolutely great. Their policies, he actually has, according to our research, Biden has a more positive economic impact on the Black community than Obama did. He's actually shifting more money into potentially, because we'll talk about that a little later, into the Black community than Obama did. Obama was simply unable to make some of the policy choices and decisions that Biden is able to do. And what am I talking about there? I'm talking about the student loan forgiveness program, which, as I mentioned, might result in $60 billion flowing to the Black community. The Inflation Reduction Act, which would add another 30 to 40 billion coming to the Black community through the parts of that legislation, now law, now initiative. So this is much better than Obama ever did. And again, not to beat up on the brother, I understand. First Black president, all of a sudden you had these white racists pop out of the woodwork and create the Tea Party specifically to hinder his ability to move politically, his degrees of freedom. And as you know, because you're down in Texas, we continue to see those waves of anti-Black policy, anti-Black economic policy that are still in place. You know, this is the MAGA crowd, the Trump crowd. They were energized by the fact that you had the first Black president, and they haven't given up on their hatred yet. So
let me ask you this though: when you mentioned the net positive impact on the Black community, if we look at inflation, where we are in inflation, the highest inflation that we've had probably over the last 40 years. When you look at the cost of housing, how do we justify that it has had a great impact on the Black community when you look at just the cost of a bill of goods with groceries? If you look at the fuel prices that are just beginning to neutralize, if you look at the cost of housing that is going through the roof. Now, I would say that income levels have gone up, but when you look at Black America, we still have a household income of maybe $35,000 a year compared to the white community, which is $50,000 a year. Well, no, let me say probably closer to $70,000 a year. And then you look at the Asian community that's to $100,000 a year. That doesn't seem like it's benefiting Black folks that much if you look at the economics of take-home pay. The majority of us are not entrepreneurs.
And plus, let me add on to that, Tom, if I may. The student loan forgiveness program, for those who did not go to college, who do not have a student loan, they don't seem to be extending that forgiveness to auto loans, to residential loans, to business loans. So how much of an impact overall were the things that Tom brought up? And I know you mentioned the student loan forgiveness, but when you balance it all out, are we gaining or are we falling behind?
No, on the student loan forgiveness specifically, if that goes through, and every Black person should push for that, because the $60 billion that we calculate will come to the Black community through Black women who were the ones that over the course of the past 10 years took out a lot of student loans to improve their educational positioning in the economy, master's degrees, PhDs, the whole 9 yards. So that's why that's so important. I get what you're saying, Jimmy. And they should extend it to things like ITT, some of the vocational lending, which it actually might apply to. But
Bill, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I think it was a good wishful thought to try to stimulate voter turnout for the midterm elections, but the reality is that there is going to be a shift in power in Washington after November 8th. And
hold that thought, Jimmy. Hold that thought. Let me answer the other questions that you raised about kind of where the Black economy is. So those are just some of the policy things that we're seeing in DC that might have, and you're absolutely right. It's not written in stone. We don't know yet whether or not that $60 billion is going to come through. As a matter of fact, as I told Tommy, I'm even hesitant to mention that it is $60 billion because we know that once people identify $60 billion coming to Black people, a bunch of people will get up on their horses to try to block that.
Well, there have already been lawsuits.
There already been lawsuits to try to block that. So I'm a little cautious about that. But for purposes of this conversation and your audience, I thought that I would mention that.
Makes sense.
Now, in terms of, some of the other things, so even if the student loan piece doesn't come through, the Inflation Reduction Act planks are in place. And though that's a law that's already been passed, haven't been a lot of lawsuits there, less than 60 billion, but still 30 billion. So we'll take it to the Black community. So there are still some other planks that would come through. Now, your question about inflation resolves to this. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. What I mean by that is that inflation is simply too much money chasing too few goods.
Services, yes.
So if you have an economy that consists of one apple, which is, and your total money supply is $1. So your entire economy consists of a $1 apple. Then the price of the apple is $1. Now let's increase the money supply to $2. The number of apples doesn't change. You still have one apple. So that apple is going to be priced at $2 instead of $1, based on money supply. Nothing else has changed. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. Because of COVID, the Federal Reserve and the government had to dump a lot of money into the economy to prevent basically World War III and to prevent the next depression. They had no choice on that unless they wanted to.
Can you unpack that when you say to prevent World War III?
So if they hadn't arranged economic activity so that they could keep people confident about their prospects and about future economic. Remember, the economy was shut down for 2 years. We've never seen anything like that. 2 solid years. You can imagine the kind of trouble that people would have gotten into if there was a massive recession, depression at the same time. You would have had 200 million people who had no jobs, no money, but would have had access to the streets and to weaponry. And we already see how that's worked out. So you would have had massive social unrest, social dislocation, which would have made it impossible to do what we're doing now, which is to restart the economy on something like a rational basis. Even with the inflation, it's still better than the alternative, which would have been a complete decline in the economy, economic activity, jobs, unable to get food, gasoline. I mean, it would have been a mess if we had not done what we did, which was dump about, $4 trillion.
Trillion.
Well, there's some charts about M2 and M1 that are different measurements of money supply that we look at. It was a lot.
Yes.
It was a lot. Okay. But again, the thing is that there was nothing else to do. You had absolutely no, unless you wanted to wreck the society, you had absolutely no choice other than to provide cash to people when they couldn't go to work, couldn't do the things that they normally would do in order to feed themselves and house themselves. So the issue is, go ahead.
What's the solution for us? I mean, we know what other people are doing. The feds are going to tighten up money supply. Interest rates are going to go up. It's going to be much harder. You have to squeeze a lot of money out of the economy, wash it out through productivity, job losses. I mean, it's not going to get better anytime soon once you do this.
Well, it might. Let's talk about the macro policy perspective first and what we say.
Okay.
And then let's talk about how Black people specifically should approach it. Sorry, macro first. Okay. What the Fed should do, and the Federal Reserve is the entity that controls the money supply in the United States. They're the central bank. They're not a conspiracy. They're not run by the Rothschilds or any of that nonsense. They're just a central bank. That's all there is to it. They're a little mysterious, and people have a hard time understanding what they do, but there's nothing a priori nefarious behind what the Federal Reserve does. Are they racist? Sure, because the economic system allocates economic resources more often to white people than it does to Black people. So that's baked into the system. But the bank itself is an independent entity that controls the money supply. Now, as I mentioned, inflation, always a monetary phenomenon. Dumped a bunch of money into the economy in order to reduce inflation. As you correctly point out, Jimmy, you've got to take that money out of the system, wring that money out of the system. The old school economic policy says that you have to increase unemployment, slow the economy down, and we know that when they talk about doing that, Black people are hurt first and foremost. So we bear the burden of that. That's the old school. That's the stupid way of doing it. The smart way of doing it is, as we've suggested, which is this. You know which companies got that money. You also know which companies are most responsible for inflation. They have a higher multiplier, a higher impact on inflation. You know which companies. Matter of fact, you're in a state that has a lot of companies that have a massive impact on inflation because
Can you explain that and simplify that for folks? When you say you know the companies that are responsible for inflation, explain that. How do you know that? How do you figure that out?
So you know that if you look at the inputs to the things that you buy, what does it take for an apple to get to the store so that you can buy it? You know that one of the key inputs, one of the key factors is transportation. You got to move that apple from point A to point B.
Fuel.
Now, fuel, when gas is $1 a gallon, well, then that apple, let's say, is going to be priced at $1. Nothing else in the basket, in the mix of things that goes into that apple price has as much of an impact as fuel prices, as quick and as large as fuel prices. Therefore, if you really want to try to control inflation, what you would do is control fuel prices. Now, the Fed knows, and again, you guys are in Texas, you got a lot of oil and energy companies down there. So what you do is you increase interest rates and on only those companies, on the companies that have the biggest impact on inflation. So again, my little taco shop has virtually no impact on inflation. I'm an inflation acceptor, not an inflation maker. Therefore, you shouldn't increase interest rates on my little taco shop. I have nothing to do with the macro picture. Shell Oil, on the other hand, or BP, on the other hand, we know that they have a huge impact on inflation. So those are the guys that you should target to increase interest rates on and make sure that they control prices, that they lower the cost of their product because of the broad long-term social impact that their product has during this challenging time. Now, a lot of the free marketeer people would say, well, that's unfair. That's going to negatively impact their profit. They're making record profits right now. That's how you know you have the room to do that. If they weren't making record profits, then sure, you could say, hey, let's not increase interest rates on these guys. Let's not do. They're struggling along with everybody else. They ain't struggling along with everybody else. So that means that you have room to control them via interest rates so that they lower the price of their main product.
But that kind of presupposes that they're interested in lowering prices.
Oh, you have to force them to do it. You have to. That's where the Fed comes in. That's where the government comes in. You're absolutely right. They're not going to do it voluntarily. Right?
Yeah. How would you?
But ExxonMobil, which I believe their profits are about $30-some billion a quarter. So they make over $120, $130 billion a year profit. That's an operating cost. But if you apply inflation to their $130 billion, well, they say, well, hey, our money is worth less than what it was last year and the year before. So I have to raise prices now to make up the value that I'm losing off what I was getting before. I mean, is that not reasonable, or nobody voluntarily takes a pay cut?
The problem is that they're the ones who are primarily responsible for the increase in the change, the volatility, the change in prices. Therefore, they can't come to you and say, well, if you increase interest rates on my company alone, then that's going to increase my costs. Yes, that's actually what we're designed. That's what we're trying to do. Because so you give them a choice. You say, listen, control your oil and fuel prices yourselves. And that way we won't have to, increase interest rates on you. If we see you doing that, and they can do that, by the way, because they know down to the penny the amount of money they're making on a daily basis.
Yes, they do.
If you do that voluntarily, then sure, we won't come at you. If you don't do it voluntarily, carrot and stick, then we're going to increase your interest rates to 20%. Everybody else is going to be paying, 5%. So, but that's that. Remember, This is a new style of monetary policy. This is a new style. This is a new policy that we here at Create Investment Research have come up with, looking at and what this is based on. This is based on the $6 trillion that the Fed gave to banks during the COVID crisis. Goldman Sachs alone borrowed $4 trillion from the Federal Reserve during the COVID. $4 trillion. Okay. So if you can give Goldman Sachs $4 trillion, you're not giving, they borrowed it and they're paying it. Yeah. But if you can set up a facility whereby Goldman Sachs can come in and borrow that kind of money, then you can figure out which companies are damaging the economy by increasing their prices, and their prices having a major impact on inflation rates for the whole economy. And you can go in and charge those guys. You can say to them, hey, your products, and again, energy company, oil company, your products are so important to the economy that we're going to ask you to control your prices, lower your prices. We're going to ask you nicely, please do this, and if you don't do it nicely, then we're going to come in with this stick and we're going to increase your interest rates to 20%. Once again, new monetary policy based on what we saw the Fed do during the COVID crisis in support of major financial institutions. If you can help those guys out, you can help the rest of us out.
It looks like we have a quick comment by one of our viewers, Edward Willis. Says the Congressional Budget Office, this refers to what you said earlier, the Congressional Budget Office numbers show that the net worth of the bottom 50% doubled during the pandemic. Most of that increase came from the higher home values plus the benefits of inflation, which is part of the article that you sent. Inflation lowers the value of fixed rate mortgages. Add in the CARES Act, extended unemployment benefits, and the incredible positive effect of the child tax credit, add wage increases, and no.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Now, I would question whether or not
Medicare costs for 2 years.
Absolutely. We certainly saw that household wealth went up because people didn't have to go to work. You didn't have to pay for dry cleaning, all of that sort of thing. And yes, home values increased because people recognize that the value of a home is not just its market value, but it has social value as a place where you can hang out during a pandemic. I mean, that was factored. What's the value of actually having a house during a pandemic? It went up. It went up. And that was reflected in home values. We're seeing some of that being moved out of the market right now with home prices falling, but that's a good thing. But in essence, the comment is, I get it. I would agree with that. But again, keep in mind that part of the increase in the value of the house was the social value of the house, which had been unaccounted for prior to the COVID crisis. Because, you didn't really think about how much you needed a house, to hang out in during a pandemic. And nobody considered that. We did. We always knew that housing had this social value, which was unreflected. But we need to incorporate that into our thoughts about the economic perspective. Now, let me get back to one other question that you had about where inflation was for various groups. I sent you a link to an article, some research that we did on the differential impact of inflation on different minority groups. We saw that Hispanics and Black people did better during COVID, have suffered higher rates of inflation now that COVID is beginning to recede. We also saw that the group that currently is being impacted less by inflation are Asians. And it's simply because of Asians' ownership of real estate. Part of the key inflation factor is we've already mentioned fuel, but also rents. We know that landlords are trying to make up for 2 years of of low rent increases all at one time. That's unfair. It's silly. It's stupid. And it serves to increase inflation on Black people more than just about anybody else, seeing your rent go up along with all of these other inflationary impacts. So this is another reason why you want to have Federal Reserve policy that is targeted and focused, because some of those landlord and big landlord companies are also people that you would target for increases in interest rates and try to get them to maintain a lower level. The profitable ones, the big ones, have them maintain lower levels of rent increases as a way of helping the overall society out. Now, finally, the other thing I'll say, and you see the chart behind me, you asked kind of how Black people should deal with this. Well, here's how Black people should deal with this. You know, what we've said is that wealth maximization, you get a lot of talk about intergenerational wealth in the Black community. Oh, we should focus on it. No. Wealth maximization is the wrong goal. Life maximization is the right goal. Life maximization is the right goal. A materialistic focus in this society that does everything it can to deny material comfort to Black people as a way of maximizing white wealth means that a materialistic focus, a focus on money, is probably not going to work out for you over the long term. So what we suggest is that you focus on understanding that in this society, money is taken as a proxy for life. Money does not equal life, but the way that this society is structured with the money worship, the celebrity worship, all of this sort of stuff, people look at money as if somehow that's the goal of life. It is not. It's kind of a proxy for life. What Black people are experts at is survival and life maximization in a hostile environment, doing it for 400 years. This is what you should be focused on. Now, in order to focus on that, what that means is a lot of collaboration among Black people, Black men specifically, because real quickly, let me tell the story about manumission. Manumission. I don't know if you've heard of that. Dr. Claude Anderson does a good video on this, but manumission is a plank in the Virginia Slave Code of 1650. What manumission said was that if you are a slave and you're in a slave grouping, and some of the other slaves start talking about running away or escaping or whatever, and you come to Massa and you tell Massa, hey, those Black people over there, they talking about running away, we will kill the people who are talking about running away, and we will grant you your freedom. So that's called manumission. And it's a policy that was put into place in 1650, which, as I'm sure you guys recognize, has an echo in today's Black society. So this idea that working together to achieve your freedom is something that the white society will make you pay for. Policies to enforce that have been in place since 1650. So recognizing that and working against that, and it's baked in to Black culture, as you well know. It's baked into kind of a Black mindset now. But recognizing it and developing strategies and approaches that address that and get rid of it is the way that we think that the Black community wants to approach this upcoming challenging economic environment with inflation going up, Black unemployment going up. So what does that mean? Operationally, what does that mean? Well, because you know that the Federal Reserve has this idiotic monetary policy which says that they have to increase Black unemployment in order to lower inflation. What that means is that you know that people in your Black community are going to be stressed and are going to be looking for jobs. Therefore, if you hear about a job or if you can create a job, then bring that information to your community. Help each other out in terms of anticipating the increase in Black unemployment and developing strategies to identify employment opportunities and bring them to your community. It's what the Hispanics do. It's what the Asians do. It's what the Indians, they all do this stuff except for Black people. And we do it in some limited capacity. I don't want to beat up on Black people.
Do it on the scale that they do, though.
Not on the scale and in the way that they even African immigrants from Africa. I remember I was working with a group of well, I don't want to say what country they were from, but they were Africans. And I was talking to the guy. We were doing some research. I think it was actually about an immigration program, maybe the H-1B visa, doing some research. And the guy didn't want to pay. He said, "Oh no, we've got to keep that money in our Black American Nigerian community." So I thought, and actually, I ran into the same kind of attitude with an Asian guy. They want to keep that money within their.
They do a much better job of it than we do.
Well, again, 1650 manumission. It's not by accident. They didn't have to go through the Virginia slave codes, and they didn't have to go through 400 years of having a diabolical policy that was enforced on you to turn you against each other so that you would not work with each other. I mean, this was intentional. It's not accidental. And this policy has been in place since 1650. So, we're lucky not lucky, but it's a testament to our skill that we're even still here, So yes, but I would agree. Other groups, based on my research, have recognized.
Not just your research, Bill. I mean, this is true. I work for this consulting work for a number of Fortune 20 companies who have HCL is one of the Indian companies they brought in to do their IT. I can't think of the other two, but they have no problem having an entire IT department, thousands of people, all Indian. But if a Black person had that kind of authority, we wouldn't dare have several thousand Black people in a Fortune 20 company. And that's all you see in the database programming support. I mean, across the board, all Black people. It would never happen, even if we could make the call.
Well, the funny thing about data processing is, I grew up in DC. And what you got to remember is that during the 60s and 70s, all of data processing was Black, because those were considered. Look up something called the Black Data Processors Association.
Yeah,
they've got pictures and they've got the history. Because back
then, but I used to be a member a while back.
Oh, okay.
DDPA.
It was all Black. It was Black people changing tapes on IBM mainframes and doing punch cards. So it just like a lot of other things, we started in that industry, helped us start that industry up. And then as it became more remunerative, white people and other groups figured out a way to move us out. And this gets to your point about the Indians. India developed an industrial policy in the 1970s where they said, we are going to focus on computer software, and we're going to develop the best computer software engineers in the world and spread them across the world. We're going to capture that industry as a policy of the country. And it worked like a charm.
Yeah, it has worked. You're right. It certainly worked.
So we are about a quarter until the top of the hour, about 8:45 p.m. And I want to make sure that we're focused. This has been a great conversation. It is already very obvious that we're going to have you back, hopefully sometime in the near future. But we do not want to go through this last quarter of our show without talking about some of the political implications of what we've been talking about earlier. So obviously, we have a midterm elections going up. Jimmy mentioned a little bit earlier. Right now, the writing on the wall seems to show a shift in Congress. And so if we look at Black America and we look at an economic agenda, we look at a political agenda, we're not just talking about voting and then going back to what we were doing. But the question is this: what is at stake in the midterm elections? Number one. Number two, does Black America have an economic agenda, which economics is tied to politics in this country? What does or should that look like? And where do we go regardless of the outcome after midterm elections?
I'll start with that last because I've already answered that question. You go to collaboration and cooperation. You go to a regardless of who wins, you start to put into place really impactful collaboration strategies, policies, and procedures in the Black community. Understand manumission. That looks like what I said. You know that regardless, the Fed's going to push up Black unemployment. Therefore, when you develop ways to let Black people know about jobs and employment opportunities. Hey, I heard about this job over here. I heard about this thing over here. No delay, no hesitation. Let's get on it and share that information when those opportunities pop up. Make sure that you provide that option to your community. Now, in terms of what it looks like if the House and the Senate change, well, it looks very bad. We know that this group is an extremist group on the other side across from the Democrats. We know that they're just extremists. They have a bunch of ideas that just don't work. They believe in trickle-down economics that never work. Tax cuts for the wealthy. We tried that in the 1980s. It doesn't work.
Well, it doesn't work for who?
It doesn't work for the United States of America, for the bulk of the people in the United States of America. It works for 1/2 of 1% of the population, but it really doesn't work for anybody else. They don't spend those tax cuts creating jobs and doing it. They spend the tax cuts on luxury good items and enhancing their celebrity status. That's what we've seen. That's what the data is very, very clear. So we know that that's not going to work for Black people. And then you add on top of that the added dangers that you see from the standpoint of social volatility and social dislocation that results from these wrong-headed conservative economic policies.
So when you say social dislocation, can you clarify what does that mean? I apologize.
So I'm talking about all of the talk about the racial hatred that you've seen, hatred against Hispanics, against Asians, against Jewish people, against Black people. What I'm talking about is seeing that, and then the added risk of the unbridled weaponry that's available on America's street. The combination of a super negative economic environment combined with racial and religious hatred, combined with easy accessibility to weaponry, means that you're going to have some very volatile social environments.
But has that not always existed? The question is, what would be the response? Because I don't know that there's ever been a time in America where that hasn't existed. It's specifically targeted towards people of African descent or the African diaspora.
Well,
that has never not existed.
Yeah. Black people have always, you're exactly right. Black people have always been subject to that elevated level of violence.
Whether that is
the elevated history of violence has always come from the far left in application. I mean, Republicans, I hear what you're saying, and it's kind of a priori that we assume that these things to be true because they've been repeated so many times. But if you study our history, even up to the modern day, there's a rich, long history of discrimination and brutality against Black people by the Democrat Party and the far left.
No, that's actually not true. The violence comes from the right wing. The violence definitely comes from the right wing.
Bill, let him finish and then I'll let you.
Sorry.
No, this is Bill's show. I mean, I want him to have voices of opinion. And we can take it offline and have another discussion later on. But when you look at Jim Crow, the pig laws, the Black Code, separate but equal, the reconstitution of the KKK, Antifa, another hooded organization, that's designed to spread conservative Republican votes. I mean, all this comes from one point: destruction of black family, destruction of Black Wall Street. All this came from one party, one side. You don't really have a history other than Herbert Hoover declaring that the Republican Party is a party for white people as an attempt to win the Southern vote back in the '36 election. Republicans then really gave much thought to trying to suppress and hold down black people because there's nothing in it for them. But the Democratic Party has a long, rich history of this, but we don't necessarily hold them accountable, hold them responsible for the things they do. We just blindly believe that Republicans are our enemy and that they're somehow working against us, even though the evidence just doesn't show that.
Those weren't Democrats. Those aren't Democrats you're talking about. The Klan and those guys, they are reactionary political actors. There's no question that they are on the right-wing side of things from the standpoint of their attitude in terms of supporting the status quo. Whether you call them Democrats or Republicans or not, makes absolutely...
Go ahead, Jimmy. Let him finish again.
1871 and 1872, Congress investigated the slaughtering of 2 million black people down in Opelousas. And this is what the congressional investigators determined, that the KKK was founded and funded by it was a military wing of the Democratic Party. It's in the congressional record.
Those are right-wing people. Those are reactionary actors using a Democratic label, which is no longer relevant for this current history. I hear you, and I understand, and you're exactly factually correct. Those guys were calling themselves Democrats. They were right-wing racists. I mean, that's clear. That's kind of obvious. That were using that label, but they are absolute reactionary conservatives. And the reason I'm responding so strongly is because you make a powerful argument, and this is an argument that's been made a lot about, well, weren't the Democrats the originators of Jim Crow and all that? Yeah, from a titular perspective, that's exactly right. But if you look at their political philosophy, they are reactionaries. It doesn't matter whether you call them Democrats or Republicans. And the modern Republican Party has nothing to do with the party that Abraham Lincoln founded. Nothing whatsoever. Complete different policies, attitudes. So them using this excuse, oh, we can't be racist because our party was founded by Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln would have nothing to do with Donald Trump or Mitch McConnell. Nothing.
You have nothing to do with the Democrat Party today, with their cancer culture. So I mean, arguments can be made both ways. My only point is that we're quick to say Republicans are racist, but and we just totally ignore anything that the Democratic Party has done historically or even recently. The defunding of HBCUs and other efforts to keep us suppressed and dependent on government somehow doesn't seem to be a problem with anyone.
And I hear you, and so I don't look at it that way, and I respect your approach, because again, you've been talking facts. You haven't said anything that hasn't been factually correct. I look at it from the standpoint of the race of the people, the policy, and their ultimate anti-blackness. We've had it's a strain of, I go anti-black versus pro-black as opposed to Democrat or Republican. Let's look at what exactly they're doing, But in answer to your question, if the Republicans are able to take over, it's going to be very, very volatile. Very, very. We've seen that. We saw that with the last guy that they had in terms of the volatility of policymaking, all of the drama, all of the discussions going back and forth. That's too much. That's not the way a democratic system is supposed to operate. You can't have that much volatility.
Why do we do this? Because we have literally 5 minutes left. And what I would like to do is to close on two things. One is solutions, which of course our viewers are always asking for solutions, because at the end of the day, we're probably not as split as the white community or the Latin American community in terms of our politics. Most of the Black community are overwhelmingly Democrat. At one time, they were overwhelmingly Republican just because, of course, of political policy. The question is this: what is it that divides across the politics that we have to focus on? You spoke to it a little bit earlier in terms of building the type of tools that will allow us to be economically more viable, because at the end of the day, we live in a country where we still have to compete on economics because we don't control our destiny. And that's the biggest issue. And then I want to make sure that you have some time to talk about your book and make sure we put that in the chat.
We didn't mention the book. We need to talk about it.
No, it's all good.
So over at the top of the hour. So tell us about your book.
Well, the book is called let's see, Thriving as a Minority-Owned Business in Corporate America, Building a Pathway to Success for Minority Entrepreneurs. And I regard it as a real honest look at where we are now with respect to Black business, and I'm anti-minority business. That minority business label has been used to shift attention away from Black people. Everybody else, Asians, Hispanics, white women who are the primary. And the book actually talks about that. But I also want to get back to this issue of solutions. So collaboration, partner with each other, understand and recognize the policies that have been put into place to limit Black cooperation, and specifically Black male cooperation, and how that has been something that's been baked into the policies of this country since 1650. Look up manumission. In Dr. Claude Anderson and his approach, so that you understand kind of how this all came to be. The other thing I would say is, share information. Begin to build the networks and the information sharing networks that will allow you or Black people to get information on those, speaking of being competitive in a hyper competitive economy, that will allow you to get information before other people do about economic opportunities, jobs, grants, loans, that sort of thing. That's the way I think you fight this. Now, from a policy perspective, I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. If a guy comes into your community and gives you $100 billion, even if you don't support the guy, you should support that policy. $100 billion, student loan relief, and Inflation Reduction Act. You should support that policy.
Let me ask you this, Bill. If you could wave your magic wand, being an economist, we've looked at the Vietnamese who've taken over the nail industry, and some Indians who've taken over hotel motel industry and become dominant players. We know that India as a nation has got into IT and heavy. What industry can we target for the next generation? Let's say from between now and 2050, that we're going to focus on targeting a lot of our kids to go into, become experts and become top earners in that industry. What would that industry be? What would that? You could just name one.
It's a couple. Certainly, professional athletics, not taking over the entire industry. I mean, camera people owning stadiums, owning teams. The top to bottom, take it over the entire industry. That's the only way you get to employment that is massive enough to make a difference in the Black community. But again, that's a strong strategy. It also depends upon geographically where you are. For you guys in Texas, I said this at the last TAC meeting, seaweed farming for Black people. It's a new industry, costs $20,000 to get a boat. Seaweed.
In the ocean, farming in the ocean.
On that Texas coastline. On that Texas coast. Now, here's the problem you have, because you mentioned the problem that you have. As you well know, the group that's dominant from an ethnic minority perspective in that industry are Vietnamese and are Asians. I mean, in Texas, right? So
it was an industry, Bill, to be totally honest.
Say again?
I didn't know farming seaweed was an industry.
Seaweed farming.
Okay.
And seaweed, or like sea.
And he said he didn't know that it was an industry at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, right. That's the other reason why I'm recommending it. because
Okay.
it's kind of a new industry as farming moves away from phosphate-based fertilizers. It turns out that seaweed is an excellent fertilizer, and it's
Oh,
the EU has said that they're going to outlaw chemically based fertilizer in about 2 years. And one of the solutions, substitutes that they're looking at is apparently seaweed. So if we can do the same thing here, the US farming market much bigger than that in the EU. If we could do the same thing here and kind of dominate that sector in a new industry. But like I say, the problem that we have is that the Vietnamese are already there. And and we have to strategize about how to do that.
All
yeah.
right.
We have taken a swimming lesson at the Y also. They moved to that industry.
And that brings us to the top of the hour, Jimmy. This has been an absolutely exhilarating conversation. Bill, I'm saying now we have to have you to come
Yeah, we
back.
got the Bill to come back.
But we're going to have you to come back because this has been the beginning of a conversation I think will produce a significant return on investments for our listeners. This has been absolutely brain stimulating for me. I appreciate you, my friend, and we will look forward to having you come back within the next couple of months or so. Is that a deal?
Outstanding. Thank you, gentlemen.
When you come back, can you bring us more investment opportunities, things that we can potentially move into with hopefully it doesn't take a great deal of capital because, acquiring capital seems to be an issue for a lot of Black entrepreneurs who are interested. But sometimes like this seaweed industry, I didn't even know it existed. There are probably other things that me and a ton of other people are not aware of that would make good opportunities for us to move into.
And then also Edward Willis put in the chat line, artificial intelligence and co-op farming.
I'll go with that. I think certainly on the AI front, I'm not a big fan of AI. I think it's going to take over the planet at some point, 100 years from now, 200 years from now. But one of the ways that we can participate is by providing a humanistic approach. We always bring the human side to these technologies. So before these white people get carried away with that artificial intelligence stuff, I would suggest that, yes, that we should be engaged and involved in that side to keep these guys in check because they'll just what's that line? Last thing I'll say. What's that line from Sting? I never saw any scientific solution that didn't end up as something worse. Starts off, oh, it's great. Oh, this is going to save a lot of lives. And then, thing winds up, killing 1 million people. So yes, we should be engaged in both of those areas, if for no other reason as to bring a humanistic side to the development of these tools. All
right. That's it, folks. We want to thank you for joining in this evening. Jimmy, any last comments before?
No, it's been great. A very good conversation. We got to have Bill back. And like I said, when he comes back, I want to hear more about some of these hidden gems that we've overlooked or people just don't tell us.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.